The oil lamps flicker across the stone floor of the Roman study. Outside the forum sleeps, but within these walls one man writes in silence. You can hear the soft scratch of the stylus on wax tablets, a deliberate rhythm without rush. This man is Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the Roman Empire, yet he chooses silence over command, reflection over rage. You lean closer to his thoughts, and they whisper something that will stay with you forever. If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. What made a ruler of millions choose not to argue? Why did he often hold his tongue even when the weight of his word could silence cities? This is not cowardice. It is quiet strength. He knew what most still fail to grasp: words are tools, not toys. Each one carries power, and when used in anger, they scatter damage. You've seen this too. That rising heat in the chest. That compulsion to speak, to correct, to win. But after you do, what remains? Frustration, regret. A fragile, hollow victory. Imagine standing in a marble courtyard, someone shouting insults at you, red-faced, animated. You respond with stillness, not out of weakness, but as Marcus did, with an inner calm they cannot touch. Their voice rises. Yours does not. In that moment, you don't just control the conversation, you control yourself. This wasn't just theory for Marcus. The Roman Senate was full of schemers and critics. He was betrayed by close friends. Even his own general Avidius Cassius declared himself emperor. And yet Marcus said little. He acted but never argued. He governed but rarely explained himself. This is your challenge. To hold your peace when your instincts beg you to speak. To remember that silence is not absence, it is discipline. That perhaps the highest form of confidence is the refusal to react. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And to explain why it is so important, we need to start with what seems the simplest. The moment begins like many others. A raised voice, a sharp word, a clenched jaw. You feel it rising in you too. That burn in your chest, that urgent need to respond to, correct, to fight back. But then you pause just for a moment, and you remember what the Stoics taught: anger is not strength. It is the collapse of your reason. Marcus Aurelius warned, how much more harmful are the consequences of anger than the causes of it. And you know he's right. The insult, the criticism, the misunderstanding, those pass quickly. But your angry response lingers. It stirs guilt. It damages bonds. It breaks your rhythm. You've seen how anger escalates everything. It's not a release, it's a trap. And in argument, it grows loudest. People rarely shout from clarity. They shout from fear, from ego, from loss of control. And if you let it, your anger will turn you into what you claim to oppose. You become the very noise you wanted to silence. But Stoicism offers another path one few choose because it demands restraint. It's not silence born of avoidance. It's silence built from mastery. The strength to feel the heat of an argument and still not fan it with your breath. There's a story from the time of Epictetus. A student once asked, "How should I respond to someone who mocks my beliefs?" Epictetus replied, "Do not respond. Let him mock. It is not you he harms, but his own understanding." That's difficult, isn't it? To let a false statement sit there unanswered. To resist correcting a lie. But the Stoics urge you to consider what is your goal: truth or ego, peace or pride, silence, then becomes your boundary. Not because you fear conflict, but because you value what's on the other side of it, your clarity, your composure, your day. When you stop seeing argument as a battlefield and start seeing it as a test of self, everything changes. Because the real victory is not winning the debate. It's walking away unchanged. You open your mouth and then stop. Not because you're unsure, not because you're weak, but because you've come to understand every word is a choice, a stone you throw or a seed you plant. Once it leaves your lips, you no longer control how it lands. The Stoics remind you that speech is not mandatory. It is a deliberate act of will. Epictetus said, "Let silence be your general rule," or say only what is necessary and in few words. But how often do you speak just to fill the silence, to win approval, or to protect the self-image you've built? The truth is, most arguments are not conversations. They are wars in disguise. The other person isn't listening to learn, they're listening to counter. And when you speak, it's easy to forget, are you solving the problem or just defending your pride? In the Roman courts, orators would hurl insults as tactics, not truth. And yet some Stoics like Seneca would pause for long stretches, letting the tension grow while they remained unmoved. Their silence disarmed the crowd more than any brilliant retort could. Why? Because silence confuses the combative. They expect resistance. They expect escalation. But when you give them calm instead of chaos, their weapons fall flat. You've robbed them of their script. And more importantly, you've kept your dignity intact. You might wonder, but doesn't saying nothing allow lies to spread, perhaps? But more often, truth reveals itself through time, not argument. And if you must speak, let it be with intention, not impulse. Ask yourself, is what I'm about to say true? Is it necessary, and is it kind? If not, it may be wiser to hold your tongue. Think of your words as arrows. Each one you fire may hit a target, but it may also pierce something you didn't intend. The Stoic chooses his aim carefully or not at all. So the next time you stand in the heat of a disagreement, remember this. Your silence can be sharper than any reply and far more rare. A fire cannot burn without fuel. You remember this as you feel the tension rise again. Someone is baiting you, pushing, waiting for a reaction. But instead of feeding their flame, you do something strange. You do nothing. Epictetus put it simply. If someone succeeds in provoking you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation, and so you step back, not physically, but internally. You deny them the one thing they need, your emotional energy. This is the principle you now embody. The fire dies without your wood. You picture a Roman street, dust rising, sandals scraping stone, voices echoing off clay walls. A merchant accuses another of cheating. The crowd gathers. Tension builds. But one man, older, draped in a worn toga, refuses to answer. He watches calm as the insults fall like hail, and then he walks away. No fury, no words, just peace. That man could have been any Stoic, because they knew what we forget when you stay silent in the face of provocation. You don't lose control, you assert it. The other person may grow louder, more animated. But what they're really doing is showing their own hand, their impatience, their insecurity. You're just a mirror now, and a mirror doesn't argue, it reflects. There's a paradox here. The less you respond, the more power you seem to hold. Not because silence is manipulative, but because it's rare. In a noisy world, the quiet voice or no voice commands attention. Some scholars debate whether this is surrender. Shouldn't you defend your beliefs? Shouldn't you correct others? The Stoics would say only when necessary. But rarely is anger the vessel for truth. If you must speak, speak as Seneca did, deliberate, composed, and only when the moment truly requires it. You notice something else too. When you hold your silence, you gain something back. Space to think, time to breathe, a shield against regret. And often the argument collapses under its own weight. The other person burns out, The fire goes cold. All because you didn't throw a single log. You sit with the uncomfortable truth. Now most arguments have nothing to do with truth. They're about ego. Yours. Theirs. Everyone's. You reflect on a line from Marcus Aurelius. You always own the option of having no opinion, and suddenly it hits you. How often do you fight not for what's right, but simply because you want to be seen as right? Ego disguises itself well. It wears the robes of righteousness, of justice, even of logic. But beneath all that fear of being wrong, fear of being overlooked, fear of seeming weak, an argument becomes its armor. Think of how often you've been in a discussion that started with ideas and ended with egos. The topic gets lost, the facts blur. All that remains is a desperate need to win. And yet winning, what approval, dominance, a hollow victory, the Stoics weren't blind to this. In fact, they saw ego as the enemy of peace. Seneca wrote, "He who does not want to be feared is unafraid." To choose silence over argument is not to surrender, it is to transcend. You picture a younger Marcus in the imperial court. Advisors bicker, generals posture. Each man tries to outwit the other with cleverness and flair. But Marcus, he listens. Often he doesn't speak at all. Later in his writings, he admits better to trip with the feet than with the tongue. This isn't weakness. It's power. Because it's easy to argue, it's harder to examine why you feel the need to. And that's what Stoicism asks of you, not just restraint, but deep inner honesty. So next time you feel that surge, the need to respond, to correct, to win, ask yourself, what part of me is speaking? Is it truth, or is it ego craving validation? If it's the latter, then silence is not avoidance, it's defiance. A refusal to play a rigged game. You choose to speak only when the self has nothing left to prove. You sit across from someone who challenges your every word. They question your beliefs, mock your values, twist your intentions. But instead of bristling, instead of launching into a counterattack, you recall Socrates, who taught not through dominance, but through curiosity. You remember how the old philosopher walked the streets of Athens barefoot, unarmed, with nothing but questions. When others argued, he did not answer in kind. Instead, he asked more questions, not to trap, but to reveal. And in doing so, he showed something remarkable, that not knowing could be a form of power. The Stoics admired Socrates deeply. Epictetus called him the ultimate model of control. His genius wasn't in how much he knew, but how little he claimed to. That's the difference. The ego shouts to be heard. The wise man whispers or says nothing at all. You consider the last time someone accused you of something unfair. You felt the urge to correct them, to defend your honor. But what if you didn't? What if, like Socrates, you responded with calm or didn't respond at all? Would the truth vanish, or would it quietly hold its shape regardless of your defense? This is where Stoicism diverges from modern instinct. Today we're trained to explain, to prove, to react instantly. But the Stoic path is slower, deeper. It invites you to ask, is speaking here a service or just self-protection? Socrates once stood accused in a court that could sentence him to death. He spoke softly, honestly, and without fear. And when the sentence came, execution, he did not plead. He did not rage. He drank the poison with peace. Because he knew the soul survives dishonor better than it survives a lie. So what do you fear when you stay silent? That others will misunderstand you, that your worth will be doubted. The Stoics teach you this: if your virtue depends on being seen, it isn't real. True character doesn't need applause or rebuttal, and in the space where argument once lived, you place something else now. Stillness, inquiry, the quiet strength of saying less. The crowd jeers. Voices echo through the colonnades. Someone steps forward, flings a crude insult. The Roman official beside you tenses, he's ready to react, to strike, to defend your honor. But you don't move. You don't even flinch. Because you remember what the Stoics endured in silence. Take Cato the Younger. A Roman senator, fierce defender of the Republic. He stood alone at times, mocked, ridiculed, even physically attacked for his unshakable principles. And yet Cato almost never retaliated with words. He believed that character was a shield no insult could pierce. That's your meditation. Now what others say about you is not yours to carry. You've likely faced it yourself. A colleague belittles your work in front of others. A family member slanders you behind your back. Online strangers hurl their judgments like stones in the dark. And still the Stoic voice inside whispers, "It is not the insult that harms, but your interpretation of it." Public humiliation is one of the deepest human fears. It strikes at identity, at belonging. But Stoicism separates the internal from the external. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "People will do what they do. My only job is to respond with justice, self-restraint, and truth." Some philosophers argue this silence is dangerous, that it allows falsehoods to grow. But Stoicism doesn't ask you to never speak. It asks you to speak from principle, not pride. If your response is born of rage, it's already a loss. If it's rooted in clarity, it carries weight. You think back to the insult earlier, how quickly it passed, how little it truly meant. And you begin to see that public opinion is like the weather, noisy, often wrong, and always changing. If you chase it, you lose your direction. But if you remain anchored, still silent when needed, then no crowd can shake you. In that way, you become like Cato, not untouchable, but unshaken. You take a breath, not to calm down, but to choose. You feel the words rising in your throat, sharp, precise, ready to defend yourself. But instead of unleashing them, you hold. You observe them like birds fluttering just beneath the surface, and you let them go. Because you've learned the principle, tame the tongue, and you tame the mind. This isn't just metaphor. The Stoics understood that your mouth is a direct line to your thoughts, and your thoughts are often chaotic, reactive, impulsive. If you can't govern what you say, you're likely not governing what you think either. And the opposite is also true. When your speech becomes deliberate, so does your mind. Seneca advised speech that's restrained shows the soul is disciplined. It's not about sounding wise or stoic. It's about knowing when silence protects you, not from others, but from yourself. Think of the Roman general Agricola, known for his quiet demeanor even under enormous pressure. During political upheaval, his enemies tried to provoke him, corner him with words. But he would often reply with nothing more than a steady gaze and a single sentence. Not out of fear, but out of control. It made him unpredictable. And in that unpredictability, there was peace. You begin to experiment with this too. At a meeting, someone challenges you publicly. You don't interrupt. You don't leap to defend. You pause. Breathe. Ask a simple question instead of making a speech. The room shifts. The dynamic softens. Suddenly, you're not a reactor. You're a center of gravity. Scholars sometimes debate whether restraint is a suppression of emotion or a transformation of it. The Stoics would say it's both. You acknowledge the wave rising inside, but you train it. You reshape it into something you own. So when you're tempted to blurt out that sarcastic reply, to finish someone's sentence, to prove a petty point, pause. Use your silence as a filter. Let your speech be like pouring water from a clear vessel, slow, clean, intentional. Because once your tongue obeys your mind begins to obey reason. You win the argument, but lose the evening. You get the last word, but spend hours replaying what you said. You prove your point, but something inside feels fractured. And now you're forced to ask yourself a question the Stoics ask daily: what is the true price of being right? In his meditations, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself, you could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do say and think. It sounds dramatic, but it isn't meant to scare, it's meant to clarify. When you remember how limited your time is, you begin to see how expensive a single argument can be. You've paid that price before. A conversation turned cold, a dinner spoiled, a relationship wounded by words that could never be taken back. And for what? To win, to be seen as the smartest person in the room. Roman history gives us the perfect example in Cicero, a brilliant orator, skilled in debate, admired and feared. But even Cicero, with all his eloquence, was exiled. His words, though powerful, were often laced with ego, and his insistence on being right made him enemies, cost him allies, and some say hastened his downfall. So now you ask yourself, do I want peace or do I want to win? Because sometimes you can't have both. The Stoic doesn't avoid truth, but he doesn't weaponize it either. He speaks when it serves the common good, not when it serves his pride. He chooses silence not because he lacks the answer, but because he knows the cost of delivering it in the wrong spirit. There is humility in restraint. There is wisdom in letting someone else believe they've won, if it means you keep your inner stillness. And often that stillness teaches more than your words ever could. So next time you find yourself cornered in conversation, holding the perfect rebuttal in your mind, ask, is the trophy of being right worth the peace it takes from me? If not, you already know the answer. Let it go. They raise their voice. They interrupt. They twist your words. You feel the tension in your chest, that familiar tightening before a storm. But instead of matching their energy, you do something ancient, something disarming. You say nothing. This is the Stoic tactic, let the fool shout first. Because when emotion rules the room, the wisest voice is often the one that stays quiet longest. And when you let others go first, when you watch them spend their energy, tangle their logic, and expose their insecurity, you gain a hidden advantage. You keep your posture. You keep your clarity. You wait. Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism, was once insulted by a heckler in the marketplace. Instead of replying, he simply looked at the man and said, "If you wish to be angry with me, I must first agree." Then he walked away. That wasn't cleverness. It was detachment. Zeno didn't see the man's insult as his own. He saw it as a performance, and he refused to audition for the part of opponent. You've experienced this too, haven't you? You've let someone blow up in anger, watched them paint themselves into a corner while you just watched. And when the dust settled, everyone knew who had the steadier hand. Not because you silenced them, but because you didn't need to. Modern debates are often noise masquerading as discourse. Talk shows, internet threads, comment sections, everyone rushing to be the loudest. But the Stoic, he waits. Not out of passivity, but precision. Some scholars argue that silence can be manipulative, that waiting to speak gives unfair rhetorical power. But Stoicism doesn't care about rhetorical games. It cares about the soul. The moment your speech comes from anger or insecurity, you've already lost something far greater than the argument. You've lost your footing. So the next time someone tries to bait you with volume or urgency, imagine yourself as a calm port in a storm. Let them thrash. Let them shout. And when they're finished, your silence will echo louder than their words ever could. There's a moment you'll never forget, when someone said something not just rude but wrong, deeply wrong, harmful, maybe even dangerous. And for a second, you hesitated. Should you stay silent? Should you speak up? Because now the question shifts. When does silence become complicity? Stoicism teaches restraint, yes, but not apathy. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The only thing that isn't worthless to live this life out truthfully and rightly, and be patient with those who don't." There it is, the balance. To live truthfully and be patient. You walk this razor's edge, not reacting to ego or insult, but not withdrawing when truth is under threat. The silence you've learned to wield isn't a muzzle, it's a gate. You open it with care only when the moment calls for a voice that serves justice, not pride. Seneca often warned against both rashness and cowardice. He believed a Stoic must speak when silence becomes harm, but not loudly, not violently. He described it like a physician cutting only when healing requires it. You recall the trial of Socrates, not a Stoic, but revered by all of them. Falsely accused, wrongly sentenced, he did not shout in rage. He spoke calmly, firmly, even when facing death. He didn't beg for his life. He used his final words to plant ideas that would outlive his body. So when injustice strikes, racism, cruelty, exploitation, you don't stay silent out of Stoic detachment. You weigh your words, you sharpen them, and you release them only when they come from clarity, not wrath. This is the discipline, knowing the difference between silence that guards your peace and silence that lets harm grow. Some criticize Stoicism for being too inward, too serene, not active enough, but they forget the core virtue: justice, courage. If your silence protects only you but leaves others to suffer, you've drifted from the path. So speak, but with purpose, with grace, with discipline, not to crush, not to win, but to illuminate. And when you're finished, return to your stillness. Let your voice be rare and therefore unmistakably clear. You notice it now, a tiny pause before your reply, a space just wide enough for thought to enter. It wasn't always there. Before your words came fast, fueled by reflex. But something has shifted. You're training a new reflex, the one that chooses not to respond. Epictetus taught, "It is not events that disturb us, but our judgments about them." And your judgments often arrive through speech. Every time you react with immediate words, you reinforce an old pattern, one that says you must answer, defend, clarify, explain. But the Stoics challenge that pattern. You think of Roman soldiers training at dawn, sweat rising from the dirt, wooden swords, clashing form drilled into the bones. Not because battle was constant, but because preparation made calm possible. And this is your training now, to pause, to observe, and to speak only when reason permits. It starts small. You receive a rude message. You draft a reply, but don't send it. You hear a careless comment at work, you smile instead of sparring. Not because you're afraid, but because you're conserving something more precious, your peace. There's a debate among scholars about whether Stoicism suppresses emotion. But that's a misunderstanding. Stoicism doesn't suppress, it steers. You don't kill your impulses. You study them. You give them space to soften before they turn into action. Marcus Aurelius often described this inner gap between impulse and choice. He imagined the mind like a citadel, invincible, but only if guarded. And words are like gates. If you throw them open carelessly, anything can storm in or out. So how do you train this space daily? Gently. You set reminders. You rehearse responses. You reward stillness. You let the silence stretch even when it feels uncomfortable. And slowly your nervous system rewires. The breath returns. The urge fades. And one day, in the heat of conflict, someone says something cruel, and you simply exhale. You don't reply. Not because you're defeated, but because you're free. That moment isn't empty. It's full of strength, full of choice, full of something few ever master: the art of restraint. You're walking through a crowded room. People speak over one another, voices rising, hands gesturing wildly. But then someone enters, quiet, composed, speaking little or not at all. And suddenly, the room shifts. That is the invisible power of restraint. The Stoics didn't wear their wisdom like a badge. They didn't shout it from balconies or argue it in courts. Often they simply lived it day by day, moment by moment, in the quiet choices no one saw. Their restraint wasn't weakness, it was reputation silently built. Epictetus once said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it, and you feel the truth of that." People remember how you make them feel more than what you say. They remember whether you stayed calm when insulted, whether you chose silence when everyone else competed to be heard. Consider the legacy of Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher. Unlike the fiery rhetoric of his peers, he rarely raised his voice. But his students would travel great distances just to sit with him. Not to hear brilliant arguments, but to witness his composure, to feel his steadiness. That's what your silence becomes over time, a presence, a quiet gravity. You may not always win the argument. You may even walk away mid-conflict. But people notice something: you don't rattle easily. You don't chase noise. You choose your peace like a daily ritual. Scholars debate whether Stoic restraint leads to repression. But repression hides fear. Stoic restraint is built on courage. The courage to leave things unsaid, to let someone else misinterpret you, to forfeit short-term validation in favor of long-term serenity. And here's the secret: the less you speak, the more weight your words carry when you do. Like thunder after long silence, your voice becomes a deliberate strike, not a scattered storm. So you keep building that quiet strength, not for applause, not even for respect, but for the one thing the Stoics prized above all virtue: without performance. Because what's restrained is not lost, it's stored. And one day that calm will be the strongest thing in the room. You scroll past another heated thread. You read a message that twists your words. You sit in a meeting where someone undermines you with a smile. And still you do not respond, not yet. Because now you understand how to apply Stoicism in modern conflict. The world hasn't changed as much as you think. There were gossipers in the Roman Senate. There were fragile egos in marble courts. There were petty rivalries scrawled in wax before they ever appeared on a screen. But what has changed is the speed and the temptation. Every ping, every comment, every email invites you into reaction. And in a world wired for noise, silence becomes your revolution. Marcus Aurelius governed during plagues, wars, betrayals. He wrote his meditations not to impress others, but to remind himself. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength applies now more than ever. Someone criticizes your project in a group chat. You pause. Ask, is this about them or me? Will this matter in a day, a week? If you speak now, what part of you is speaking wisdom or woundedness? You see, modern Stoicism isn't about retreating from conflict. It's about stepping into it differently. When a colleague speaks from ego, you speak from clarity or not at all. When family stirs drama, you remain the calm center, even if your voice shakes. It doesn't mean you never address harm. It means you don't let harm shape your words. You shape them first. There's a danger in modern discourse, the belief that speed equals intelligence. But the Stoic sees something else: deliberation is power. In business negotiations, in friendships, in online spaces, the one who speaks last and least is often the one who changes everything. Some say this restraint is cold, but it's not. It's warm discipline. It says I care too much about my peace to let this moment hijack it. So you begin to speak less, not because you have less to say, but because your voice now flows from strength, not impulse. And in the quiet, you lead. The world slows down, but your mind sharpens. The noise fades, yet your presence expands. You're no longer driven by the urge to explain, to prove, to win. Instead, you sit within your own stillness, and it feels like coming home. This is the victory of the quiet mind. You've walked far since that first moment, the heat of an argument, the sting of insult, the temptation to react. But now you see clearly that temptation was never about truth. It was about fear. Fear of being unseen. Fear of being misunderstood. Fear of being small. And yet, the Stoics showed you something else. Marcus Aurelius, standing alone at the edge of battle, said nothing to silence his critics. Epictetus, once a slave, endured the cruelty of his master without shouting. Cato, mocked and betrayed, died with his integrity untouched. What they shared was not apathy, it was sovereignty, the unshakable authority over their inner lives. You reach this slowly, breath by breath. You feel it when you let a comment pass, when you choose peace over precision, when your silence isn't awkward, it's solid, when the argument plays on, but you've already exited the stage in your mind. Philosophers still debate, is the quiet mind a form of withdrawal, or is it a transcendence? The Stoics suggest it's both. You withdraw from the chaos of reactivity, and you rise above it, guided by values stronger than emotion. You may still speak, but now each word comes through filters you've trained. Is it true? Is it needed? Is it from virtue or vanity? You may still be misunderstood, but now that no longer unsettles you. Because your peace is no longer dependent on being heard, it's rooted in knowing who you are. And when someone challenges you, when they raise their voice, when they try to pull you back into the storm, you smile gently and say less. Because you understand now, true strength isn't loud. It doesn't perform. It doesn't need an audience. It just is. And from that place, you finally rest. The room darkens around you now. Whatever noise the day held, the tension, the rising heat of arguments left unfinished, it all begins to dissolve. The light from the window softens. The voices in your head grow quiet. You lie back like a Stoic in his study after sunset, the wax tablet closed, the final page written. You did not chase every fight. You did not feed every flame. You practiced something rarer than speaking well. You practiced not speaking when silence would serve more. The echo of ancient footsteps follows you into this quiet, Marcus pacing slow marble halls, Epictetus closing his eyes before sleep, Cato standing tall as the world spun madly around him. They are here not as ghosts, but as reminders. Your stillness is your shield. You understand now your voice is sacred, but it is not required. Not for every battle, not for every wound. And in this moment, this long exhale at the edge of night, you give yourself permission to say nothing at all. The world will still spin, the noise will still pass, and your worth, your peace, your power remain untouched. So close your eyes now. You've done enough for today. And in your silence, you've already won.